Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Javier Palomares.
Hi, everybody. How's it going so far? We've had a day and a half. Are you getting what you need out of Washington? Has it been good for you so far? I want to thank you all for participating, for coming out. We've got chamber leaders from Texas, from California, Hawaii. We've got chamber leaders from Ohio. It's a wonderful time. We have, unfortunately, 2 groups of 30 each that are in with senators as we speak. And there is a vote, I guess, going on. I'm not entirely sure what has transpired, but you will have people trickling in. We wanted to have a very intimate, mixed audience to share some thoughts, have a question or two with what we consider to be a panel of phenomenal leaders. This organization is blessed with a number of corporations with which we partner, and you all know that. Some of you represent some of those corporations. We have for a long time thought that there is yet a lot of work to be done in the context of diversity in corporate America, and particularly diversity in boardrooms. We have watched carefully as Carlos Horta from the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, help me welcome him and thank him, by the way, has led this dialogue for several years. We had an opportunity earlier today to speak to Senator Menendez in the Hispanic Task Force on Diversity and Inclusion in Corporate America. And we thought that we would weigh in on this issue as well. This is the inaugural CEO panel series. We have brought together some phenomenal leaders who really are leaders on a global scale, who have managed brands, are right now running brands that are of a global nature. These individuals understand corporate diversity. They understand the power of diversity of thought and how that can be used to maximize your impact in the marketplace. I'm not going to talk about them other than to introduce them very, very quickly. Steve Reinemund, Pamela Patsley, and Sol Trujillo, who many of us already know. The individual who has coached us through this process and really spurred us in this direction and urged us to make sure that we too weigh in on this very important issue is Victor Arias, a close friend of the association, an advisor of mine, and somebody who, frankly, to our audience doesn't need me introducing him. But he has, on numerous occasions, helped corporate America recognize the power of diversity. A senior executive at Korn Ferry, a good friend of our association, a good friend of mine, and somebody who's responsible for what we're doing here. We plan to continue the panel series as we move forward as an association, partnering with ACER under leaders like Victor. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Victor Arias of Korn Ferry. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Javier, and welcome to everybody here. Here we are sitting in the middle of the power of Washington, D.C. It's grandeur, and we're in the midst of some very critical times here in Washington, D.C. Still in the throes of the back parts of a recession, hopefully an imminent recovery. We're on the heels of an historic election, and just lots of issues that affect our country. Yet, on the other hand, we sit in a group of very talented Latinos that have made contributions to this country in terms of defending its sovereignty, in terms of providing security, in terms of providing jobs, and creating lots of value for America. And so it's under this backdrop that we invite this talented group of people here next to me, who are leaders in their own rights. These leaders have faced many challenges, and we've invited them to kind of give us an insight into their leadership styles and how they have run the organizations that they have run. They have certain things in common. So obviously, they're all very accomplished leaders, whether they're CEOs of companies or leaders in their communities. They're also corporate directors. basically overseeing operational leaders of multinational companies. Their companies, if you look at them, whether they've been CEOs or the boards they sit on, they're all global in nature. So they have to look at this in a very, very broad sense, rather than just thinking about the U.S. And finally, and most importantly, all of them recognized early on and fully that their corporate success depends on embracing the Hispanic consumer and embracing the Hispanic community. So those are the things that really are common about all of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of them, but I'm not going to give you the bios because you all should know the bios. But I'm going to give you 3 points for each. I'm going to talk about leadership. I'm going to talk about community, and I'm going to talk about maybe a personal point or two. And so I'm going to start with Steve Reinemund to my left, immediate left. Steve Reinemund, Naval Academy graduate, submarine commander, former, and then just service to our country in many regards. Matter of fact, he was a guard at the White House for 2 administrations. So he was breathing that rarefied air way back when. CEO of PepsiCo. I mean, started a 23-year career there, but eventually became CEO of that company and took it over in a very tough environment post-2001 when the economy had slipped. But he looked to non-traditional areas of revenue growth and opportunity. And a lot of that was the Latino market. And you know, he really showed discipline and what I would call risk-taking intuition in pursuing those kinds of opportunities. He's currently the dean of the Babcock Graduate School of Business in Wake Forest. He started that in 2008, and that is another passion of his, which is to really look at education as the platform by which to catapult our just overall American communities. His community work, very involved with the Salvation Army, making all our communities better, providing access to health care and to the most needy of them. He's been recognized by many Latino and African-American groups alike, including NCLR, for whom he has been such a strong proponent for many, many years. And on the personal side, I'll use one word for him, and that's balance. It's hard to find the right way to manage both your personal life, but also your professional life. And he does it well. I mean, he is a family man, very visible at his children's events, particularly the athletic events. I really do think that when he grows up, he wants to be a high school basketball coach. And he's also tried to learn Spanish. I've tried to teach him, and he hasn't done very well in that regard, but I know he has it in his heart. And so with that, Steve, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about, you know, who you are, what has been your road to your success and the leadership that you've shown both in the community and also with PepsiCo and the corporations you serve on.
Well, thank you, Victor. And I think the only reason I'm here is because I'm Victor's friend, and we used to go to a lot of basketball games together. And everything I know about basketball, I learned from Victor. So I make a bad call, and you taught me that. You know, we all have our life stories, and I'm not going to bore you this afternoon with sharing my life story. But I think as I sort of reflect on my life at this point in my life, I realize that I am and have had the opportunities I've had based on sort of the first 10 or 12 years of my life, as most of us have. And I'll just reflect on a few things in that part of my life that might sort of explain or give some credence to what I've done and been able to do in my life. My mother had 3 children. She was married at 19 and widowed at 29 and had never been to college, and we really didn't have a lot growing up, but she left me with an enormous, I think, and rich set of values. First, the faith that I have is what I saw lived out by my mother in very difficult circumstances, and it was through those days of her figuring out how to provide for us that made me realize that her faith was real, and it became real to me. She also believed in me all the time. I mean, even to this day, you know, and my kids get on me for this because I tell them this and they say, why aren't you like that, Dad? But she has never told me what to do or criticized me or done anything other than support me and tell me you can do anything you want to do. So I grew up sort of believing this American dream that you really can achieve because she believed in me. And, you know, even though we didn't have what was now called a functional family, she imbued on us the importance of family. And I have a brother and a sister, and all of us are married to our first spouses, and we've got over 100 years of total marriage and kids, and that's really important, and that's been an important part of who I've been. And then lastly, she encouraged others around us to support us, and I have had the privilege of having mentors all my life, but the mentors that I had early in my life were really impactful because they intervened when there was no reason for them to, other than it was the right thing to do. And they taught me a very important principle that has been an important part of who I am, and that is they leveled the playing field for me. And they brought me to a situation where I could compete, whereas I would not have been able to do it on my own. And I could tell you story after story, starting with my second grade school teacher, who she and her husband and my wife and I still see each other. And she was an important part of my life at that point, and a counselor in junior high school who I remember going on stage in a room somewhat like this to give a speech for student council, to be student council treasurer, and everybody had a sport coat or suit on, and I went up there with a tie and a shirt because I didn't have a suit. And before I went up the stairs, he took off his coat and gave it to me. And at the time, I thought, you know, I was a little resented it. You know, I thought, what is he doing? He's making me conform. And then later, I realized what he was doing. He was leveling the playing field so that I could compete with the other people up there. Now, it didn't help because I still lost, but at least I had a chance to compete. And I think those sort of early principles have been what I've tried to carry through in my life, sometimes more successful than others, and that's, you know, faith and family and this idea that you can achieve if you commit yourself, and then the idea of reaching out to help others and leveling the playing field. And that's really why I'm in education today, to try to provide that for others. So that's sort of who I am.
Thank you, Steve. Pam Patsley, CEO of MoneyGram, on the boards of Texas Instruments, and also on the boards of Dr. Pepper Snapple, and has spent, I think, 14 years on the Coors board as well. Sort of primed as an accountant, but then worked her way up at a very early age as a CFO of a large company that went public, kept going into companies that were private, taking them public, IPO, going back and forth. But she took over MoneyGram. Most of her background is in financial services companies. But she took over MoneyGram also at a very tough time, highly regulated environment, highly competitive environment, had some financial issues, and she's brought them basically out of that and has enjoyed tremendous success at MoneyGram. And so that's kind of her leadership background. On the community side, it's very interesting. Boys and Girls Clubs is one, which is very important to the Latino community. Also, Baylor Healthcare, the foundation there in Dallas. But one of the things that she does is she serves on the George W. Bush Institute, the Women's Initiative Advisory Board, and it's in this board that she's done some incredible advances with women entrepreneurs, especially from disadvantaged areas around the globe. And so she's mentoring somebody right now that's from, I think from India. From Egypt, that's trying to do some internet-enabled type of businesses over there. And so I think that speaks loudly about Pam. On the personal side, you know, she has a family. She likes to travel. She's a voracious reader. And so she likes to be on top of what's going on globally. But she made an interesting comment to me. She said, you know, I must be the most bought and sold woman in the United States. Now, she was referring to her businesses, but she is very humble. She doesn't like to talk about herself, but she's obviously accomplished a lot and been in many places, been the first in many regards in the roles that she's been in. So with that as well, Pam, I would love to hear from you, your kind of road and how you've gotten to where you've gotten.
Okay, thank you, Victor. That's very nice, and I'm glad you didn't speak about sports ability or talk about basketball, because then that would be a short joke. Anyway, it is just fascinating as I sit up here, because this is my first time to meet Steve, and the similarities of story. And I often say, its work is, a wonderful, a lot of people would look at my schedule and say, you just live and it's work and you're all about work, but it's really about faith, family, and friends. And it's kind of those three that are the glass balls that you can't let break while you're fully immersed and having fun and hopefully doing some good along the way in your business career as well. So I think, again, as probably many successful people and people in this room and all over, it comes back to that family. And I was very fortunate. I'm the daughter of two educators, so a math teacher and a third grade teacher. And, probably until I got to high school, I probably thought I was going to be a teacher. And then I took accounting and said, nope, I'm going to make some money. And I hate to say it, I was motivated to make money. And my parents still remind me of that today. So I went to the University of Missouri and entered as an accounting major, and amazingly didn't change my major, left, and was an accountant for 6 years with KPMG. When Victor and I were talking, I guess, some of the things that, you're faced with decisions along the way. And I was committed I was going to be a woman partner. There weren't many women partners in those days at public accounting firms. I think now there are far more women graduates in accounting than there were, but that wasn't the case in the 70s. And I was presented this opportunity to leave and be a CFO for this organization that Victor referenced. And I said, nope, I'm going to be a partner here. And they said, no, this would be perfect. Just send over your resume. I said, this is busy season. It's December, year-end audits. I'm a manager. I don't have a resume. I'm not interested. I said, if you've got a questionnaire you want me to fill out, send me a questionnaire. Well, they just were persistent enough, and it piqued my interest enough, and I took the chance, and I left, and of course have never looked back. And I guess sometimes we're all faced with these decision points in our life, and at that time you're single, you had no one to be responsible for but yourself. Clearly I was able to do that, and I kind of evaluate things often in a more, what's the downside? And as it turned out, it was just nothing but tremendous upside, but the downside was I hated it, it didn't work. I was pretty confident, Pete Marwick was going to take me back. And thus there were just many changes of controls. That's why Victor said the most bought and sold woman, which truly I actually think, it's probably more than a dozen changes of controls, which for everyone here in business, that's actually a pretty good thing.
Absolutely.
Along the way, or generally it is. For me, it's worked out very well. So let's go to MoneyGram, what I'm doing today, and I think about just the exciting morning that I had following such a great leader like Javier around, from the breakfast this morning to the meetings on the Hill. And, we have so many issues facing this country, and it's encouraging to see people getting involved often with one voice. And, that's kind of the interesting and exciting thing about our business. I've been running global businesses for well over a decade, and it makes the world feel small. And that's such a wonderful thing for each of us. And the diversity, I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about that, diversity of the boardroom, diversity in our corporate staff. But it's, we're in 192 countries, And I just love what I learn when I get out and travel and I go to a small island in Malaysia, or I'm in a small village in India, or it could be just anywhere, different parts of Russia. You know, it's funny to say that what I enjoy for my personal life is traveling, given all the travel I have to do, but it's just something we enjoy as a family together. And seeing, you know, I find that the lack of awareness is really the root of most of our problems. And if we could somehow get people more aware of the diversity and what's important and finding that balance. So the next chapter for me, I hope, will be focused either on education or some form of give back in improving this great country we have. And again, I'm honored to be here with you all. Thank you so much.
And then, last but not least, is Sol Trujillo. I've had the pleasure of knowing him for a few years as well. He's one of the few true international CEOs that I've ever known. One, he was a CEO of Quest, based in the United States.
U.S. West.
U.S. West, excuse me. Yeah, Quest was another. So U.S. West, excuse me, based in Colorado. Then he became CEO of a company called Orange, a telecom company in France. He moved over there. Then he became CEO, made another move to Australia to become CEO of Telstra. There are very few CEOs that you will ever get to know that have done those kind of moves and lived in country. And so he's a true international CEO. And he is the first Latino Fortune 150 CEO, and still, I think, the only one so far. And but you know, he is grew up in Wyoming. Went to University of Wyoming. More importantly, while he was there, somebody from Wyoming. The important thing that he didn't stop school. He got his BBA, but then continued on with his MBA program, which is a 2-year program. He asked for permission to do that in a year, and the dean sort of hesitated. And he did this all and crammed it all into 1 year while he was also working. And so a tremendous amount of drive, leadership. And he said, you know, I've always taken on the jobs that nobody has wanted. That's how he's managed his corporate career. He's on the boards of Target, boards of WPP and Silk Technologies, you know, global companies. Community, he's involved with many Latino organizations, but I would say many grassroots. He likes to fly under the radar, and that is typical of Sol. He's very concerned with the image of Latinos in this country. He's trying to change some of that in some of his own efforts. He was honored recently by the National Society of Hispanic MBAs as a Lifetime Achievement Award. Most of those people that get those are usually dead, but he's not dead. And so he's one of the first. He's the first recipient of that award. He's driven, but he's very compassionate. I usually have to walk behind him because he is definitely one of the best dressed executives I will ever be around. So I usually have to walk behind him.
Tell me I did that.
Behind both of you, behind the three of you all. And then I will say about him, he also has great musical talents. He does play the trumpet, and he did play the trumpet in a mariachi group working his way through college. So adelante, Señor Trujillo, and would love to hear your story and how you've managed what you have.
Great. Thank you, Victor. You know, you heard a story about a very common theme, I guess, about the strength in terms of the family that you grow up in, and mine is no different. You know, my parents, my father went to 3rd grade, my mother went to 5th grade. They got married at 14 and 16, but when they had their children, it was always about inspirational, kind of motivational perspectives about how we were going to go to college and be successful. At the same time, the other thing that is relatively common here is this idea about if you grow up without a lot, you start thinking about, well, how do I get a lot? Right? And in my case, I used to look at all the kids I'd go to school with that used to have, they could afford cars, they could afford clothes, they could afford a lot of things. And And it was always, they grew up in families where the parents had teaching jobs, they ran businesses, you know, they had titles of things that I didn't even know what they were. And so as I thought about, you know, growing up and getting an education, I went into business in terms of, because that's where the money was. And those of you that have heard me speak recently, I still talk about follow the money, because that's where power is, where wealth exists. And so one of the things then that, as I think about my growing up, I grew up as a Latino. My last name was Trujillo. And back then, when I was getting my degree and thinking about business, and I went into work for the largest company in the world at the time, called AT&T, the Bell System, there were no Latinos anywhere in kind of senior executive, middle management, anywhere. The names that you saw that had names like Gonzalez or Martinez or whatever, they were people that generally worked on the janitorial crews, maybe in the secretarial pools, etc. And so for me, one of the motivations was, you know, I grew up in a family where my parents, like Steve said, you know, you can do anything and be anything that you want to be, and I believed it. And so the one thing I did learn, though, however, was that if you were slightly different, the rules were different. And so you had to work a little bit harder, maybe do it 2 times instead of 1 time. And it was part of then kind of the way that you strategized a career path. And for me, it wasn't about complaining about it and lamenting it. It was more about, okay, those are the rules, so you go play by the rules. And then you beat the rules in terms of thinking about it as a game. So in terms of my career, it was always about, as Victor said, doing the jobs nobody wanted to do, taking on, you know, assignments that people thought couldn't be done in terms of results, et cetera. And the one point I always thought about was performance. Performance was always the motivator for me. It was like winning a basketball game, or you know, conducting the symphony that, you know, was just the one that gets the greatest applause. Is that at the end of the day in business, those that own their businesses, run their businesses, those that work in big companies, at the end of the day, your customers look at the results that you deliver to them. Your shareholders look at the results you deliver to them. And the employees that work in the company, they look at the results that you deliver to them in terms of the working environment, the compensation, and the whole mixture of things that were there. And so for me, as I think about retrospectively, the big drivers have always been competing, but for an end result. It was always trying to trailblaze, because as Victor said, there weren't role models or pathways that had been blazed, but it never stops you. And if you're motivated, if you're competitive, if you're passionate, and you're principled in terms of what you do, it really does make a difference. So I want to commend, you know, all of you for being here, because one of the big things that I've thought about, as Victor said, is that I'm working today a lot in private investments and trying to stimulate wealth creation for Latinos in the financial services sector, the technology sector, the media sector, and some other places that I've been working with different folks. But part of this is that, you know, the Hispanic community can be as successful as any other community. And the convening of organizations like the USHCC and the convening of successful business people coming from all parts of the country, and being able to show that there is a common agenda. And the agenda is about regulatory reform, and it is about you know, the things that affect your bottom line, access to capital, et cetera. And when people here in places like Washington, D.C., hear these messages, the perspective, the image, and ultimately the impact starts to change. And so I commend you for convening this, for making it happen, getting the kind of leadership engagement that you're getting, because I think this is, clearly the math speaks loudly about what Hispanics and Latinos in this country offer to the future of our country. And when people see people like yourselves that think the same way about success, that think about results, and that think about employing people, and think about making wealth part of our agenda, because this is a capitalist country. And I say that very proudly, having lived abroad and in countries that don't think that way. You know, we're very lucky to be in a place like this, but at the same time, we're very lucky to have people like you that are taking control and taking charge.
I mean, you'd have to pay for something like this, y'all. So this is very cool. Let's go to some questions, and I've told you all, and we mentioned a little bit, Javier had mentioned it earlier, corporate governance is an area that is a great way to move the needle on this wealth creation piece that you're talking about, because you have to sort of build relevance in the corporate boardroom so you can make some key decisions. So Pam, I'm going to ask you the first question on corporate governance. I mean, what have you done in your company to help sort of move that needle, and what has it meant to, what has the Hispanic community meant in terms of how you have looked at your corporate governance?
Great. Great question, and one that I feel very passionate about, and one that early on, Victor mentioned that starting in 96, 97, I can't even remember now, I went on the board of Coors Brewing Company. And that was my really first great experience, where I saw a company that realized who their customers were and wanted a board to mirror that. And that was the board that I joined there. Of course, for MoneyGram, it's so just who we are, and our whole employee makeup is so diverse. In fact, I just got an update this week of all the language skills in our corporate offices, and it's only 160 people right now. It is the longest list. I'm at the bottom. I mean, like, if I had one thing I wish I could do, I wish you need to teach me Spanish.
I'll teach you the good Spanish, too.
It is the second most spoken language in the world.
I know. I mean, it is. We need to get this right. I'm off subject, but I just want to, most everybody in this room has a huge advantage on people like me who only speak one language. But anyway, so our employee base is very diverse. It needs to be diverse because of our business. We're in 192 countries. And so we are building our board with diversity. We have, besides myself, another woman, and we just appointed former ambassador to Mexico, Tony Garza, to join our board. And it's as much about, to me, though, I don't want to get too hung up on gender or ethnicity. At the heart of it, it is about diversity of thought. You want diversity of backgrounds. Sometimes that's driven by ethnicity or gender, but you don't want a board filled with everybody who's been a CEO or everybody that's been a CFO, nor do you want everyone from government, nor do you want everyone from academia. You need diversity. Diversity of thought, to me, is at the core, and there are a number of ways to go after that. So that's, I think, it's kind of common sense, though, isn't it?
Sure, yeah. And Steve, you kind of went through the same exercise at PepsiCo, and especially starting with the markets, but your board as well. How did you address that there?
Well, I think at PepsiCo we've had a history for decades of a commitment to diversity, so it wasn't something new when I walked into the CEO role. In fact, Saul was on our board when I became CEO, so we clearly had a spokesperson for diversity on the board at that point, and we always have. I mean, going back into the 40s, our founder, Don Kendall, was very committed to it. I think, as in many companies, you go through cycles, however, and for us, we had some major growth in the 80s and 90s, and we also had some changes, and over time, sometimes you get out of kilter. The country was changing demographically very quickly during that 10 or 20 years, and we sort of got a little away from where we had been historically. So when I became CEO, we needed to balance it back a little bit. I think our board was probably more diverse than our senior management. So we really worked at both, and I know Saul was a big advocate of supporting that effort. And it's really critical to have diversity on the board for lots of reasons, not the least of which it's hard to get initiatives in the company if the board isn't supportive of it, and the board can't be supportive of it if they don't represent the interests of the broad community. And so people who feel that, you know, it will sort of trickle up, that isn't really the way it works. It's got to both trickle up and trickle down. It's got to be on both sides, and we worked hard at doing that. We clearly were not perfect, but we spent a lot of time and energy against it. And I would just maybe share one thought. I think all of us in our journey towards learning and our understanding of diversity is an evolutionary environment. I look back at some of the things I did early in my career. I look at things I did early in my time as CEO, and I cringe because you realize that learning how to manage in a diverse environment is an ever-learning experience. And the one caution I would offer and do on many occasions is if we could be a little less judgmental and a little more helpful and supportive of moving the agenda along, I think we'd help all of the companies that are represented. And I know I'm on 4 corporate boards, and when we're looking at board selection, diversity is always the first thing that we talk about. And we work hard at trying to get there, because most companies recognize today that it's really critical.
And Saul, you kind of were the head of, as a former CEO, of being the advocate for it in the board makeup, but you also are on some boards where you're probably the person they look to look at this agenda. So what's your view on the whole corporate governance thing?
Well, I look at it from multiple perspectives, but let me start first with a plain old statement, and you heard me say it a few minutes ago. Performance is ultimately the metric. Either you are or you aren't. So process and all that, it needs to be done, and it needs to be done well. But at some point in time, you know, you look at some of the boards and you say, why don't they have X, Y, or Z? At the end of the day, either they do or they don't. And so I think there is an element of accountability, and the accountability is not because it's a good thing to do. So I look, for example, at today, the statistics that probably most people here in the room know. You know, when we think about governance, we think about good governance, which is to have people that can think and look and help the company deal with the markets and the customers that they're dealing with. We had probably in this country a great epiphany probably in the late 70s, early 80s, when a lot of research was done and people found out that women made 70% of, you know, purchase decisions in the home. And all of a sudden there was a big move of getting women on boards, women into key roles, et cetera, and it took time, but it built. And now we've probably hit a flat point, my opinion, in terms of where we are with women in that kind of context. I experienced this when I went to Australia. I went to the company that I was running, and we had 50,000 people, and we had like one woman in our top 20 executives. And I called our senior team in and I said, where are the women? And they said, why are you asking? This is true. This is true. I'm not making fun of it. I gave a big speech since I was running the biggest company down there in Australia and a big kind of community event, and I talked about, you know, women and their importance and all that sort of thing. And literally, I had people come up to me and say, what's the issue? And so, you know, although sometimes we take things for granted, some of us have to lead by example. We have to say the things that need to be said. We have to do the things that others may be uncomfortable doing, but it should always be for the right reason. which is if you're in the governance role, you're doing it to make your company better. You're doing it because it will help you grow volumes. You're doing it because you'll build customer loyalty. You're doing it because you'll attract the best talent to your company. And you're doing it because shareholders will value essentially what you do. And so, you know, my sense, when I took over US West, where we split our company and I had to build a brand new board, that was part of, you know, the agenda I had, because we served customers of all types. And when I was in Europe dealing with a very multinational company, it was more about what did my senior management team look like? You know, was it all French? Was it all British? Was it all, you know, or did we have people from the Middle East? Did we have Africans? Did we have Americans? Did we have a lot of kind of that kind of diversity, not only geographic, skill sets, you know, and other experiences that were important. So I'm a believer that at the end of the day, results matter. So if I look, for example, at the top 10 companies, the 10 largest companies in this country today, I'm almost certain that none of them, for example, have an Hispanic on their board. The largest market cap companies, which I think is a problem for those companies in terms of ultimately how they go about things. But to Steve's point, it's nice to say that, but it's okay, so how can we help people understand that? And part of the understanding comes from, there's a lot of talented people that have grown businesses, developed customer relationships, have great presence, all that sort of thing, that can be candidates for some of these companies and their boards, and bring that kind of special value add for the success of their company. So,
thank you. One of the important things coming out of this is this impending recovery. And so given the people that are here, the business people, you know, what kind of things do you foresee on the horizon? How is this going to be? How is this game going to be different than it was even 4 or 5 years ago? And how does it impact, you know, the Hispanic entrepreneurship, for example? What things should they be looking for in this impending recovery? And so I'll start off to you and come backwards, if that's okay with you.
well, you know, the idea that we have a recovery is, to me, it still remains a bit of a mystery, whether we do or we don't. I do sit on the board of Target, so I get to see a lot of consumer behavior kind of information and data. I sit on the board of WPP, which is a global company with probably the broadest presence almost imaginable. I mean, parts of the world that they have, you know, agencies and firms, and seeing the volumes of work and the growth that's going on. But I think in the case of the U.S., you know, we have a stock market that's doing very well. And a lot of the financials are driven by a lot of consolidation and a lot of other things that drive value, that, you know, earnings go up and expected earnings go up, and so you have share prices going up, so indices go up, and, you know, it looks good. We're starting to see some, you know, some declines in unemployment, which is probably a good real metric that helps people understand. And then when we look at, you know, are people really buying, and what does our savings rate look like while we buy, so that we don't over leverage like we did in the last couple decades. You know, all these things are giving us still, I think, a little bit of mixed signals. Okay. So what to look for? I mean, clearly, I think the city that we're sitting in is going to have something to do once elections are over, in terms of hopefully finally addressing some of the fundamental issues. And unfortunately, it takes getting past the presidential election. And what's unique about this one is that we know that the sitting president is not going to be running again. And we know that, you know, if there's a Republican, then it will be that they have an opportunity to run again. But we have these dynamics that tend to affect whether people will make good policy any policy or just, you know, point fingers.
Sure.
And I think that right now we've got to unstick some of our fiscal issues while we try to figure out ways to be more competitive, and that comes back to each of the businesses. We're creating job growth. Hispanics create more companies at a rate of 2 to 1 versus non-Hispanics. And again, that's all statistical data, but there's ways that we can take control as well.
Pam, what do you think? What are your thoughts? I know you said you had attended some of the sessions today, and
Yeah.
the rate of job growth in the Hispanic community sort of caught your eye as well.
Yeah, and just, you know, from a numbers perspective, it's just so impressive. And I think I heard that of the fastest growing segment of the Hispanic, you know, entrepreneurship, small business owned, is actually the Hispanic woman owned business in terms of fastest growing. So that definitely caught my ears and attention. You know, whether we're in the recovery or not, I tend to agree with everything that Saul just said here. You know, I think someone mentioned it today, and I cannot for the life of me, we heard so many people talk this morning, but it was the person who said we have to quit, I think it was one of the congressmen from Florida, you know, we have to quit moving the goalposts. So certainty, I mean, what is the arena that whether you're small business or corporate America or whatever, you can execute and lay out your business plan. It is about performance. It's about returning value to shareholders, whether they're your family, yourself, or, you know, public shareholders. And so what is, you know, what's the game? What are the rules? What are the tax rules? Why don't we know if the R&D tax credit is going to be there until December every year? And then it's retroactive for the whole year. And for the accountants in the room, you know, your tax rate is something the first 3 quarters. Then all of a sudden you have a massively different tax rate the fourth quarter because you have certainty. I mean, you know, it's just like crazy that someone couldn't think 12 months out to know if the R&D tax credit is something we should do again for the next 12 months. Maybe we should think about even longer than 12 months. And I'm not advocating for that. It's just the certainty. Say we either have it or we don't, or we're going to think about it and keep it, and then, you know, and then things are retroactive. Well, you might have made some different decisions all along the way had you known. And so I think this whole regulatory environment, whether it's taxes, other things, I mean, certainty is what people are looking for. Certainty, stability, and say, just give me the rules, be clear what they are, be clear about what they mean, and I can go, you know, execute then in that. Even with some of the healthcare reforms, I think it is so uncertain. What do they really mean? What does this mean? How am I supposed to do this? Is it best to, you know, and so we just, you know, that uncertainty, and we see that, you know, that one of the, being more on the corporate side and not the entrepreneur side, some of the statistics that I have hated to see are from the financial market perspective, that the Hong Kong market, even FTSE, others, are gaining more IPOs than the U.S. The U.S. should, in my opinion, own that business, and it is kind of the regulatory environment that has, you know, we have lost some of that momentum in the financial markets, the capital markets, and I hate to see that. So, you know, again, certainty I think would be very helpful for all of us.
Steve, any thoughts on?
I may be a little bit more optimistic. I do think we're in a recovery. I don't think the recovery is going to be like the recoveries we've seen in previous recessions for lots of different reasons. But I do see worldwide, you know, this is a global economy now, and I think what has hurt the United States for the last, maybe last 6 months or a year is the uncertainty outside the United States. But I think Europe may have hit bottom, or it's probably not going to get a lot worse. And Asia looks like we may not have the hard landing that we thought, and then I think the U.S. is on a slow recovery. What does that mean for this group and for businesses in general? And I see the world from a couple of different vantage points. I serve on a few boards, so I get the vantage point like Saul talked about in terms of what you see there. But I also am at a university, so I know what the students are looking at now. And students today are different than when I graduated. They're not looking to enter the large multinational companies, US-based companies at the same rate that they were. And that's a good thing because, frankly, I don't think the growth is going to be there for those companies, and the opportunities may not be there that they once were. I do think the students that enter in that area there's going to be a common thread of the importance of tenure and the importance of experience, because the global competitive market and the margins in global companies are going to be tight. So I think it's important for students that are entering in those companies to be committed to stay there and not to move around, because they're going to benefit themselves in their careers if they do. But back to this group, I think the opportunity for small business has never been better. And I would hope the Chamber, along with your peer chambers and other organizations, will push the government to take away the regulatory stranglehold that keeps businesses from being able to grow. And it's not the thing, it's a stranglehold, and I don't need to tell this group that, it's not, I mean, taxes, yeah, that's true, but it's the challenges of all the minutiae you got to work through before you can actually get out there and sell something or make something that is really the problem. And so I think if we can influence the lawmakers to understand that if you can just clear away that morass and give the entrepreneurs the opportunity to go out and do what they can do, I don't think we've probably had a better environment. The students want to go work for small companies. They don't want to go work for large companies. They want the personal attention of being in a family kind of environment that just isn't there in large companies today. They want the opportunity to go out and to achieve something that may be viewed as impossible. They want to go out and take that opportunity, and large companies don't have that like small companies do. So I think the time is right, and I certainly hope that the dialogue in Washington will get beyond the unproductive discussions and get to really making the environment, go back to making the environment a place where people want to start businesses and feel, feel successful and feel they can be successful in doing it.
And then out of respect for the schedule, we got started a little bit late, but some of our panelists do have to get on planes. I think we are going to forego Q&A. So I'm going to ask one more question of the panelists, and you can feel free to come up and talk to them. But this last question really is about education. And education is the sort of the lightning rod that runs through the business community. It runs through our country, the safeguarding of our country, the talent pool, our competitiveness edge. And so I want to ask you, Steve, and we'll start with you, Steve, since you see this firsthand at higher ed. What things do we need to change in this country, especially for all our kids, and to make it an imperative, because we need to train our kids. And the fact is that, as I think Saul gave this fact, 1 out of every 2 18-year-olds is a Latino that turns 18 in this country. And so, what do we need to do as a country to make the changes and commitment to education in general?
Well, I don't think the problem in education is at the university level. The students that are there are better than ever been. I would not want to have to compete to get into college today because it's tough. I think the issue is the students that don't get there. And it's bringing, we can't have the growing population of students who just dropped out of the educational process. That is going to kill us as a country, and that's the biggest single problem we have. I think there's things we can do in higher education to get better. We can have more emphasis on STEM and less emphasis on liberal arts, and I probably get shot by my faculty for that, but but they're at the margin. We've got a great educational system. People all around the world, our government makes it harder and harder for us to continue to bring people from other countries in to take advantage of it. That's a whole other story. But again, that's not the point. I think the point is in our cities where we've got to figure out ways on a local level to make sure that our kids get through the educational process and have the opportunity to get to college. If they have I would submit that I think one of the things that's wrong out there is kids that have the capabilities to get to college, they can get there today. There are means. Maybe it's not as efficient as it should be. There are means. The real issue are the kids that way before they get to high school, they're doomed to failure because they don't have the background. And that is a really, really tough problem. And frankly, I think it's the biggest single problem that we face in this country because that's going to doom us if we don't fix it.
Okay. Pam, coming from school teacher parents,
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It is a passion of mine, and I totally agree. I mean, there are things that need to be fixed, around accessibility and, affordability, different things like that. But it is at, it's K through 12. And really, I think that middle school age is the most vulnerable. I think that's where we lose the most. And, we have got to get that fixed. And I'm not an expert on this. I just know from a passion, it has to start young, it has to be endemic, and it has to be, across the board. You're all about the numbers and performance. Maybe we need more performance metrics, and I know this is a lot of the debate right now, but in our schools, because we don't tolerate the accountant that has poor performance, or the lawyer or the engineer, whatever they are in business, or the salesperson. You don't make quotas, you starve because you're on low base and high commission. So how do we get some of that to just raise the whole bar and really bring it back to teaching is a profession? And a little bit, that's what I heard from my parents. Teaching should be a profession. It's kind of the heart, and it's where it all starts. And so many of our problems, it's all circular, right? So anyway, love to raise all the boats on a rising tide.
So
I would say ditto and ditto. I think what has been said is exactly right. I think Governor Bush, the Florida Governor Bush, has proven dramatic improvement in results by focusing actually on the elementary age students to drive success in middle school and ultimately high school on into above. And there's lots of anecdotal schools around the country that have found the same thing. So this notion that says emphasizing this young age, making sure kids are getting to the schools, incorporating the parents, all that sort of thing. So I won't be redundant. That's as much as I'm going to say because I think it's been well said. On the other hand, I also believe, having seen very successful people that didn't graduate from college create big companies, having seen people in my career that didn't have the college degree but could be successful, I would say there's another dimension that we can also help. And that is what I would call involving young people into work opportunities that you may be creating in your businesses. And I've had chief technology officers that didn't have a college degree, that were just brilliant. But they had the basics, so they did get, good elementary and junior high and high school, but they had that ability to think, to probe, to innovate and do that sort of thing. And sometimes that comes by getting an actual work experience. And it's not just doing the things that I did when I was going to school and working 3 jobs and all that kind of stuff, washing dishes and all that, sweeping floors or doing construction or moving furniture or all those kinds of things, but it's actual in-business kind of opportunities. And I think we should think, while we're solving kind of the macro kinds of things that are systemic, taking ownership, taking control about finding young people in your communities that you can employ, give them great work experience, which motivates them to want more. And I think that's equally important.
Let's thank all our panelists for just... They've taken time out of their busy schedules. They flew in and then now they're flying back out. And so it really is a sacrifice and a real commitment to USHCC for them to come here and visit with you all. I'm going to close with a quick story, because what's been consistent with the 3 of them has been, faith, family, and friends. And I remember back when we started the Hispanic MBA conference in Miami, there was a guy by the name of Brian Dyson. I don't know if you know Brian, but he was the CEO of Coca-Cola Enterprises. Himself a Latino, he was Argentinian by birth. And he said, when I'm going through my career, he said, it's a balancing act constantly, and I'm usually balancing 5 balls. I'm going back to one of the analogies you gave. And that is, one of them can be, my friends. It could be one ball. He said another ball can be my spirit, my faith. Another one can be my family. Another one can be my, outside activities, my sports. He said I can have 5 balls, and I'm juggling them all at the same time, trying to find out, the most efficient way to get them as they're coming down. He said, I have found out in my life that all those balls are made of rubber. If one of them falls, it's going to bounce up. You can catch it on the way up. He said, except for one. He said, and it's made of crystal, and that's your family. So this is our family right here. So thank them for coming, and thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Victor. Good job.